Welcome back to Robbit, my toybox style puzzle game I've been building in the Godot engine. Since I last posted, I've revamped the summer levels exclusive mechanic, worked on and finalized designs for a lot of the UI, and designed, for now at least, all of the 20 summer levels. I've got another devlog planned right after this one to cover the new settings menu, so stay tuned for that as well. With that out of the way, let's start with some sunflowers. As some of you might remember, when I initially came up with the summer levels mechanic, I decided on heat. The trouble with that was twofold. From a design perspective, it was quite difficult to make levels where the heat mechanic had a meaningful difference on gameplay. The tomatoes never changed throughout the level, you'd just lose if the bar filled up all the way. This was the other issue I encountered, player satisfaction. The mechanic wasn't really fun to engage with, since you were simply completing the level in the most efficient way. It would lead to unnecessary frustration, and the positives simply weren't there. So I began brainstorming a good replacement, and I settled on sunflowers. The basic idea behind them is an obstacle that changes throughout the level, blocking movement half the time and letting objects or the player through the other half. Since sunflowers are known for both growing and wilting quickly, they were an obvious choice. I was pretty happy with my first iteration, and animating it both ways was quite simple, so I got it out of the way pretty quickly. Mechanically though, I had to decide two things. First of all, when do the sunflowers grow or wilt? Second, since they block movement when grown, what do they do when an object is placed on top of them? Initially, I wanted to make them grow every few moves, but then I realized it'd be too easy for the player to just walk back and forth and manipulate that. So I settled on having the sunflowers grow or wilt when a tomato is placed in a basket. While that doesn't quite make sense in isolation, of course, I added a cute animation that I'll showcase in a little bit that ties it all together. Of course, this already added a constraint to my puzzle design. I couldn't let the sunflowers be directly next to a basket that the player needed to push a tomato into, because otherwise the sunflower would grow directly under the player and collisions would overlap. What I could do, however, is go back to that second mechanical decision that I had to make. What if the sunflowers were able to push tomatoes? When designing the pushing system, I had to keep a lot of different restrictions in mind. The sunflower started as just a collision that gets toggled on and off, so I added some raycasts around to search for nearby objects. In the script, this is used to decide which directions are open to pushes. Because I have to take other sunflowers growing into consideration, I have a slight delay after growing to account for the collision being toggled on or off. The default pushing direction is right, rotating counterclockwise depending on if a direction is blocked. This adds a lot to my puzzle designs already, allowing the player to set up tomatoes to be pushed in automatically or get them shifted off a wall they're stuck on. And thanks to the way that I implemented the push function of the tomatoes, I'm able to simply call it from the sunflower and everything runs as expected. Visually, the sunflower is pretty simple. I've got the 3-frame animation and a little particle emitter that's meant to be a sprinkler, though I'm definitely going to tweak it in the future. I added a small detector for when the player or a vegetable overlaps a wilted sunflower that plays a little wobble, animating the rotation of the sprite. Finally, as I mentioned before, there's a separate animation for changing the flow of the sprinklers. The raccoon emerges from his little stump house and messes with a faucet, switching water from one set of sunflowers to the other. I made it really quick, so you'll have to pay attention to catch him sneaking around while you're solving the puzzles. And speaking of solving puzzles, I wanted to open up more avenues for level design so I was less constrained. This led to me completely reworking some of my basic puzzle systems, but I love how it turned out, so I am not complaining. I wanted to make it work more like standard Sokoban levels, as that would allow me to make things a lot more compact and have tricky puzzles that don't require a massive amount of space. I began by making one of my bigger changes. The player can now move through baskets. It was simple enough to remove the collision, but I wanted it to look nice, of course. I split the sprite of the basket into 2 pieces for the front and back, with the split being right in the middle. After messing around with some Z-ordering shenanigans and resizing the sprite a few times vertically, the final iteration looked like this, which is exactly the effect I was going for. After that, it was time to make it so the tomatoes can also be moved out of baskets. It wasn't too much trouble, luckily, but it did require a bit of restructuring. I added some logic to make the tomato become visible again, made the collect animation a bit faster so it could play from 2 adjacent baskets, and made the player have a movement lockout when the collection animation is playing, all of which helped reduce some of the weirder interactions that I was seeing early into implementing this. In a similar vein, I also added a movement lockout for the sunflower animation, so the player can't move into them before the collision appears. With all of this done, it was time to start designing levels. And oh boy, design levels I did. I decided pretty early on that each season is going to have 20 levels, with 5 of them being challenge levels. Every third level complete will unlock a challenge level, and while I have them as part of the sequence currently, I plan to make them optional with a pop-up that notifies the player they've been unlocked. The first 8 levels of the summer don't include the sunflower. They're meant as a bit of an introduction to Robbit's mechanics, while the challenge level managed to be difficult without requiring the sunflowers. After level 8 though, things kick into gear with the introduction of the sunflower. My goal here is to make it clear to the player when a new mechanic is introduced, and while I will have dialogue for parts of this, the levels themselves will also serve as a guide initially. After that though, I'm free to make things as difficult as I please, and some of these challenge levels definitely fit that criteria. The last thing to do now that I have all of these planned out for the summer is to decorate. I've got a lot of props, but I want to make more of them to have a good visual variety between levels. I'm also playing around with day, night, and lighting in general, so check that out in the next devlog where I'll cover it more in detail. In the previous devlog, I went over the pop-up level icons, and I did eventually figure out how to fix them so I can have them appear in order. But I have a great idea to add just a little more into the menu. When the player hovers over a level, the seasonal art on the other page changes into a preview of the hovered level. I initially wanted level previews to simply set the texture of a sprite on the page, and that's how I had it at first. It ended up being a bit more complicated, though much more scalable, as I don't want to go back and edit the preview image every single time I make a change to a level. The current implementation uses a sub-viewport node to load and show a set portion of each level. As a level is hovered over, the script clears all children of the preview node, instantiates the level in question, and disables all of its animations and particles so it can give a static preview. When the player changes pages, I simply clear the texture, making it so that I don't have to individually animate 20 different page flips. Flipping back to the front page with the brand new escape button functionality I added, there are buttons now. You can see the settings gear up in the top, which as I said, I'll cover fully in the next devlog, and I tried to follow the style of the in-level UI for the play and exit buttons. Animating these was actually really interesting. I had all the different sticky notes fly on and off the screen at different times, so I had to be careful with overlapping textures. They peel on when you first enter the menu and off when you open the level select. With that done, the level select is now fully functional, which is really exciting. Of course, I can always improve and iterate, and I'm almost 100% going to. But still, it's really nice seeing everything come together like this. That's about it for this devlog. As I said before, I plan on dropping the devlog for the settings menu pretty soon. It turned out really nice, and I'm really excited to share my progress on it. After that though, the plan is to move on to the fall levels and mechanics. I'm considering starting up the Steam page once I make enough fully realized levels, so keep an eye out for that in a future devlog. I will of course make a big announcement when the page goes live to make sure you can all go wishlist it. Leave any questions or suggestions you have in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.